It's got good bones. This is definitely something I can say after a 14-hour play session with Gray Zone Warfare, which recently rolled out in a closed alpha to a group of about 250 streamers. The game's been met with a wave of enthusiasm, and while I'm not about to rain on that parade, because let's be clear, it's a solid game, I've noticed my take is a little bit different from a lot of other streamers. It's not that I'm not impressed, it's just my views haven't exactly lined up with the majority of other streamers, and that's totally okay. In today's video, I'll guide you through my own experience with Gray Zone Warfare, and I'll share my thoughts on the game, which might be different from what you've heard so far. The first decision you'll encounter is choosing your faction. Straight off the bat, you're met with the character creation screen. It's a fairly standard soldier template, which is understandable given the game's early alpha stage. However, in a game like this, it's not so much about your initial appearance as it is about the gear you acquire along the way. Looting and buying modded weapons and badass armor is where the real customization lies. One aspect that might rub players the wrong way though is the faction system. You're locked into your chosen faction, which means if you and your buds aren't in the same faction, you won't be able to team up in game. It's a really big, bold design choice, and while it adds to the game's realism and immersion, it also presents a potential barrier for those who want to play with friends across different factions. Sure, down the line we may have the option to switch between characters, but not everyone has the time to invest in multiple playthroughs. Now, about the gear that I mentioned earlier, stumbling upon new equipment is always exciting. During my playthrough, I found a bandana, and I really did start chuckling at the thought of resembling Prison Mike. However, here's the kicker. There's no way to preview how your character looks with the gear equipped. It's a bit of a downer, to be honest. I mean, you'd expect to see yourself decked out in all your newfound swag. Hopefully this gets addressed in future updates, because part of the fun is not just finding cool gear, but also seeing your character rock it. In your inventory screen, there is a shadowy figure, and this is where I'm guessing is going to be your character and how it's shown. So again, it is early alpha. I just want to make sure we are able to see our character eventually. The level of detail in Gray Zone Warfare's world at this early stage of development is truly amazing. The environment is so beautifully crafted that it's impossible not to be captivated by its beauty and sheer scale. Spanning an expansive 42 square kilometers, all while doing this without one loading screen, is truly remarkable. The dynamic movements of trees swaying as your teammates pass through them, or the realistic reactions of foliage to gunfire, they all add layers of immersion that truly elevate the experience. It's evident that the developers poured their heart and soul into creating this mesmerizing backdrop, and I can't wait to explore further into the depths of the jungle. However, as amazing as the outdoor environments are, there's room for improvement when it comes to inside of buildings. They tend to feel monotonous and lack individuality. Each house I entered felt like a replica of the last, which detracted from the overall sense of immersion. And I also noticed there were no enemies inside like 95% of the buildings, which created this sense of safety that somewhat took away from the tension and excitement of just exploring the world. Also, the looting mechanics leave something to be desired. While some areas like the airfields or the bunker offer opportunities to discover unique weapon components and gear, the lack of a robust bartering or crafting system means that loot often feels lackluster. Sure, you may stumble upon basic supplies like medical kits and food, but the lack of meaningful loot diminishes the incentive to scavenge and explore, without the chance of finding rare items to trade or utilize for survival later in your journey. Sure, you may find some new attachments or armor, but that's pretty much the extent of the loot you'll be looking for, and because you can't have all this type of loot everywhere, it seems like most locations are empty and less exciting to explore. After I just talked about the lack of loot, I know what people will be saying. But Geekseh, this isn't Tarkov. And I get that. But if you're coming from a background of playing Tarkov, there are definitely elements in Gray Zone Warfare that'll feel familiar right off the bat. From the trader system to the intricate gun crafting mechanics, which I must say can be quite challenging if you're not well versed in weapon assembly, and even the structure of tasks, there's a distinct Tarkov-esque vibe. But it's important to recognize that Gray Zone Warfare carves out its own identity, particularly in the early stages of gameplay. The focus leans more towards PvE rather than PvP. They've been even going so far as introducing servers that's solely dedicated to PvE gameplay, a feature that I'm sure many will appreciate, But if you're expecting the frantic PvP-centric experience of Tarkov, you might need to adjust your expectations. The developers have made it clear that while PvP is indeed a component of the game, it's not the primary focus. My biggest gripe probably has to do with the quest system, and while it is pretty unreal that each faction has 100 unique tasks, my experience so far with having almost completed 20 of them have left me feeling somewhat underwhelmed. The tasks themselves come across as rather repetitive and lacking in any sort of engagement. Typically, you'll receive 2 to 4 tasks from various traders, most of which involve fetch quests that feel all very similar. Whether it's scouring the same starting town for corpses, retrieving misplaced items, or simply dropping off markers and packages at designated locations, the repetition can become very, very tiresome. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd be more than willing to tackle some of these tasks if the rewards felt a little more substantial. However, more often than not, the rewards of a backpack, a helmet, perhaps some cash, didn't quite hit the mark in terms of satisfaction. What I'd really like to see is a greater variety in task locations. It often feels like I'm stuck visiting the same places repeatedly simply because I've unlocked a new quest that conveniently sends me back to the same starting town. It's as if I'm revisiting the same spots over and over just because the next task happens to be in a building down the street from my previous one. Right now, the AI in the game could use some work.
No, they don't push into buildings. Like when you go into a building, you know you're safe too.
When they're under fire, they tend to just run back and forth, eating bullets like it's nothing. The devs have acknowledged, though, that this is a bug and the promised fix is on its way. It's pretty strange, though, to see them not taking cover or reacting much, especially when a single shot sends me scrambling for cover to do some surgery. I'm hoping for smarter AI behavior once the bug is squashed. If their health is adjusted, though, to a more realistic 1 or 2 shots, it could change the whole game's dynamic, though. Currently, they're intimidating because they're bullet sponges, not because they're tactically challenging. As for the gunplay, it's pretty solid for an alpha build, but aiming down sights and performing actions feel a bit detached. It's got that milsim gunplay vibe, which isn't bad, but when you get your hands on it, you'll get exactly what I'm saying by milsim gunplay vibe. It's very far from the gunplay in games like, say, Squad, Tarkov, or even Hell Let Loose, but at the end of the day, we have to remember it is just an alpha build. The method of travel in this game is pretty unique. You start from your base and you head to a landing zone via helicopter. What's neat is you can go from one landing zone to another landing zone directly and you don't have to make a pit stop at your home base. However, there is a catch to this. Once you're on board on a helicopter, you're stuck. Even if that helicopter hasn't taken off yet, you cannot get off. I found this out the hard way when I mistakenly hopped onto the wrong chopper at the beginning of our play session, and I wanted to get off, but I just couldn't. Unfortunately, some players are exploiting this feature by camping LZs.
Oh, there's people here. Right below us. Come on, man. Are you really?
Which will become a problem in the future if they don't fix it. They're either ambushing players as they disembark, or they're catching them in the boarding animation, leaving them entirely defenseless. It's definitely an issue the developers need to address, especially considering the potential for it to worsen as more players join the game. Despite this, there is something amazing about just flying over the game world and taking in the scenery below. It really draws you into the game and adds to that immersion. I'm eager to see where the developers expand on this mechanic and where they'll take it in the future. And the biggest part is these developers truly have a passion for their game. The dedication they've shown in bug fixing and the transparency with the community has been outstanding. It's clear they care deeply and have a clear vision for the game's future. What's even more commendable is their decision to release the game openly without locking it behind an NDA. This demonstrates real confidence in their product and a willingness to stand by it. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got my criticism, but let's remember this is still an alpha version. There's plenty of room for improvement, and I genuinely believe they'll address many of these issues as development progresses. While I may not be as addicted to the game itself as others are, I'm definitely hooked on this team. They've got guts and a clear vision that they're not willing to compromise on just because a few voices are clamoring for more PvP content. And trust me, there are plenty of those voices out there. So here's to Madfinger Games. Keep forging ahead, keep pushing boundaries, and keep creating the game you envision. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, remember to subscribe to the channel. It is free for you guys. It does mean the world to me. I don't know how much more I'll play of Gray Zone Warfare Beta, but I'll probably be here or there with it and then playing other games. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.